So I finally got this set up. So something that's been kind of bugging me over the last couple of weeks is that I've been actually trying to get this kind of frame that's around that jersey set up on all those pictures over there. Those ones right there. Can't really tell now. Let me just focus that in. There you go. Okay, so trying to get those pictures on this type of frame. And I basically bought that frame at IKEA, but now they don't make any more of these. They only make those, which is way too big for that. And they make a bunch of them that have those kind of white borders around. So something basically like this, but instead of being able to remove it, you can't actually remove it at all. And you actually have to keep it part of the frame. So it's kind of useless and I don't really like it. So now I'm just stuck with this one and now I have to go find something for those. And basically there's a couple more pictures that's on that table right there. And just trying to get those all put up on the wall like that. Just kind of show off some of the guys that have been through here and kind of get them some dabs because these guys have just been like pushing it for the last couple of years and have been really having some good off seasons. So I just like to, show the guys my appreciation for what they've done and, the hard work that they've put in and kind of, show off some of their accolades and what they've been able to do in their careers. So, yeah, but that's basically that. So today's episode is essentially going to be about the difference between. Now, one of the things I wanted to mention was that this topic basically came to me a couple of weeks back when I was doing a podcast session with a couple of buddies of mine, which I'm going to put a link up here so you guys can go and check that out. And we basically discussed squatting and deadlifting and the difference between the two. Or, we discussed their philosophies on them. And it kind of got me thinking about what I wanted to do and what I thought about both of those exercises and how to kind of draw them out. Now, what we're gonna do is I'm gonna head over there. I wanna kind of show you guys and kind of draw some stuff up and at the same time be able to go through some different types of reasonings and some background on them and some theory into why I think either way about any of those two exercises. All right, let's go check that one out. So one of the things I did want to mention before we really get started and kind of dive into this and kind of pick these two exercises apart is that I want to mention that I do deal with a specific population for majority of cases. So I deal with skaters and basically hockey players. So when you are dealing with a specific population, that population can generally bring about almost some innate dysfunctions, right? So skaters and hockey players generally, not skaters, figure skaters, but hockey players tend to have tight hips, they have tight inner hips, they have groin issues, they have low back issues. They have a lot of dysfunctions that go around the hip area simply because skating is not a natural movement in itself, and oftentimes we have to almost adjust for it. I just realized how off my camera was. I gotta figure out. Leveled off. Okay, sorry, I had to level off that thing. It wasn't even set level. So, anyway, when you do deal with hockey players, as I mentioned, there are hip issues, but at the same time, there's ways to get around it and there's ways to build around this. And if you are using any one of these two exercises, you have to at some point kind of take into consideration that innate dysfunction that they may or may not have. Or if you are dealing with a group, you want to make sure that you're dealing with that. Now, if you yourself are an individual that is a skater, hockey player, or you have been playing hockey for many years of your life, there's a possibility that over that long period of time, you developed a dysfunction that kind of kept itself with you and you kind of retained throughout the years. And now you've carried that into a gym setting. So you may want to pay attention to a couple of those details. I'm going to point them out because it's very obvious for me to point them out because there's stuff that I deal with a lot. But at the same time, maybe something that you want to think about yourselves. Now, I don't want to talk too much about the differences between squatting and deadlifting. Obviously, those two exercises are pretty clearly different, right? One is a bar hanging down by your legs. The other one is a bar on your back or on the front of your shoulders here. Now, because there's different variations of it, they will all target different areas of the body. So for a deadlift is a primarily posterior chain exercise. So what posterior chain means is you're going to go hamstrings, butt, low back, upper back, shoulders, basically anything that's on the back side of your body. Now, a squat is, for the most part, a more anterior chain exercise. So you're gonna get more quads involved, and you're gonna get, basically, if you do a back squat, which is the bar that's on the back of your shoulders, so you're racking it behind you like that on your shoulders, that's gonna get a more equal balance between the quads, the hamstrings, and the glute. Whereas if you're going with a front squat hold, so basically when it sits on the front, and you either get your elbows up like that, or you cross your arms across your shoulders like that, you're gonna get more of an anterior chain, so more quad dominant movement. Now, depending on which one you use, that's gonna be the main difference. There are differences in foot position as well, but at this point, it doesn't really matter. The main difference is that where the bar is placed and where the bar is held, that's gonna be the biggest difference between those two exercises. Now, over the past couple of years, one of the things that's kind of come up as a big discussion has been whether squatting and deadlifting is actually any good, whether it's good for you, whether it's likely to cause problems or not. And it really is an interesting discussion because a lot of it comes from one or two cases happening or a couple of cases happening, and then everyone just kind of writes off that exercise and says this is how it is. So in the case of deadlifting, for so many years, deadlifting was considered to be terrible for your back because it would cause back pain or back problems. And now squatting has become very similar in that sense, and everyone's kind of saying that if you're back squatting or conventional squatting, you're a high likelihood for back problems and hurting your back later on. Now, while I understand both of those situations, what I will tell you is the reason a lot of that came about was simply because the person itself was not ready to do the movement. Deadlifting and squatting is not bad for you. You're bad for deadlifting and squatting. If you're not ready to deadlift and squat, it's your fault. It's not the fault of the deadlift or the squat. Your body might not be ready for it, you may not be strong enough, or your body mechanics. You may have a difference in ratio between your thigh length and your leg length, and also your torso length that might not be allowing you to get into one of those positions properly. You may have difficulties at the ankle, you may have an ankle mobility issue that may be causing a limitation. There's so many things that could come about that can cause you to not be able to perform one of those exercises properly, and that's why a lot of individuals are almost kind of not sure how to think about it, because they've got half of the population of strength coaches and professionals saying squatting and deadlifting, or squatting or deadlifting, or either of the two, they've picked one and they've said they're not good for you. Then you've got the other side who is like, yeah, it's great, it doesn't really matter. And we want to basically sit somewhere in the middle, so we're making sure that we're not contraindicating an exercise for the person, we're contraindicating a person for the exercise. And so the answer to the should you ever squat question is very difficult because it has a lot of factors that really come into play and are going to dictate whether you should or should not be squatting and whether you should be picking one over the other. Now, it's very possible for you to be able to do both. I'm one of those individuals that can squat and deadlift pretty well, and there's no real reason or no real slowdown or limitations for me to be able to do either of those exercises. But again, I fall into a very thin slice of population, and I also don't have a sport that's dictating my body's natural position and my body's tendencies, as opposed to someone else who may be playing football, who may be playing baseball, who may be playing soccer, hockey, skiing, who may have limitations because of their sport that's causing them to not be able to do one or the other. Now, to know which is best for you is pretty difficult to know on your own because you can't exactly see your technique. But if you have someone either film you or look at you and tell you kind of what they're seeing, they may be able to pick out a couple of the things. So the first thing I would tell you is you want to make sure that you're not deadlifting or squatting heavy from the beginning. And the other thing you want to pay attention to is that you're not ramping up the weight very quickly. One of the fastest ways to get hurt on these two exercises, or any exercise for that matter, is really ramping up that weight a lot. And the other thing we want to make sure that we're doing is we're focusing on our body's ability to stabilize the back. Stabilizing the back is a crucial issue. Now, I don't mean stabilizing the back like doing back extensions. What I mean by that is really training the deep core musculature to be able to hold on to that kind of weight. We also want to make sure that everything underneath us is moving properly. A lot of individuals jump into heavy squatting but haven't really established a good amount of hip mobility, a good amount of low back stability, a good amount of core stability. You know, they don't have the ankle mobility for it. And we generally always try to just kind of say, you know, oh, we're gonna work on it while we squat heavy, where that shouldn't be the case. Build your mobility, build your movements, then load the weight. Now, to determine if you are able to actually complete either of those two movements, I would tell you the first thing, make sure you can do it without weight. If you can't do it without weight, there's no point in doing it, right? If you can't complete that movement without weight, you adding weight just means that your body's not able to actually control it, and the addition of weight is essentially just changing your mechanics to allow you to fall into that position. That's not what we want. We want you to be able to do it without the weight, then add the weight on as more of a progression to that movement and not as a facilitator to that movement. So I'm gonna break down both of these exercises a little bit, not go too in detail and too in depth on them, but just kind of give you almost the global look at what you should be looking for in those exercises. So the first thing is when we look at a deadlift, I'm gonna slide this back so you guys can see. Grab a bar here. Okay. When you're doing a deadlift, what you want to make sure you're doing, I mean, aside from the obvious foot position, what you want to be able to do is bring this bar, which is very little weight. This is about 45, this is a 45-pound bar, it's a standard bar. So I'm going to bring the weight down. I want to get to a point where I'm 6 inches off the ground. I've got a nice flat back. My back doesn't start, my low back doesn't start arching, and I don't start losing my spine. I want to maintain that neutral spine position that I'm always really trying to hammer home with you guys, and I want to keep a nice neutral curve in my low back. I want all the movement to come from the hip. So when I'm looking at this movement, when I drop to the bottom position, one of the things you want to notice when I'm in this bottom position, so let's say my hands are about 6 inches when I wrap them, they're about 6 inches off the ground now, it's the angle at the front of the hip that I'm looking for. Now, there is no set specific angle, but what I generally will tell someone is if they go anything past about a 45 degree, if they get less than about 45 degrees, sometimes you can get to 40, but anything really past 40 is really tight. And generally what will happen is you'll run out of space at the front of your hip. So to improve or kind of gain that wrap, you'll basically gain that depth that you need, your body will start wrapping itself over, and that's gonna cause you to kind of pull yourself over, wrap over, and lose that neutral spine. If you don't lose that neutral spine, you'll lose it from the thoracic spine, which is almost just as bad. So what you're gonna be looking for is looking at the distance between the thighs and the torso. You wanna make sure you keep a nice safe distance there and make sure that that bar travels straight down. So when you're looking at that bar traveling that bar path, what we're looking for is we want to keep that bar right underneath the shoulder blades. So basically when I'm standing here and I come down, the bar is directly, I'm going to draw a line on the screen so you guys can see, the bar is directly down underneath my shoulder blades. I'm not letting it travel in front of me, I'm keeping it right behind and basically sitting right underneath my shoulder blade. Now, if you're able to complete those two things, keeping a nice straight bar path, and the other thing is making sure that you don't close at the hip, the deadlift might not be a bad exercise for you to do because you might be able to biomechanically fall into that favorable position. Now, if we look at the opposite side of the spectrum and we look at a squat is basically your ability to kind of sit down into almost like this hole that you've created for yourself. So a couple of things are gonna change. The foot position is gonna change and your body's position at the bottom is gonna change. It's more of a sit and tight position instead of an elongated position like the deadlift. The deadlift, like I said, because I'm elongated, I'm pushing my hips back and I'm dropping forward, I'm getting more posterior chain because my body's wrapping around. When I'm squatting, I'm gonna stay more upright, so my body's a little bit tighter, which is gonna use a bit more quad and anterior chain to support itself. So if you're able to squat right to the ground without weight, so basically getting to that full squat, deep squat position with a nice tall back, with a nice body position, under control, feet flat on the ground, if you're able to do that, I'm very comfortable allowing you to squat because then I know for certain that your body's able to support itself in that natural position, and then you're able to load yourself and squat properly. So now you might be asking yourself, what if I'm someone who can't deadlift or can't squat properly and I can't squat fully? Should I ever squat? Now, what I would tell you is that, let's say for example, you're not able to squat deep right down to the bottom and deadlifting is not an issue for you. You've got a nice clean deadlift, but you can't squat all the way to the bottom. What should you do? Now that doesn't mean you can't squat. What that means is that you should be very, very, very limiting on the amount of squat you are doing and the weight that you're doing when you're squatting. If you can't do it, what I would recommend is doing something like a goblet squat, which is basically using a kettlebell. You can't even see them. Basically using a kettlebell like this, holding it tall, like that, and then sitting down into a squat, and that's basically gonna be a goblet squat. And it's not a lot of weight, but it's still gonna train your legs, and it's not really gonna do much to your spine. There's very minimal spine compression from a weight of that magnitude. There's generally gonna be, your body can resist a lot before spine compression becomes an issue. So you can probably start with that, and you won't be able to hold all that much weight in your hands at that height anyway. You're probably gonna only limit yourself to a certain amount of weight anyway, but still be able to get some of that squatting movement in there. And again, you also wanna look at the fact that it may be a mobility issue. You may have a hip mobility issue that might need fine tweaking to be able to perform. Now, if you can't deadlift, the other alternative would be to do a kettlebell deadlift or a trap bar deadlift. Trap bar deadlift, we don't have, it's usually sitting right there. It's basically a long bar with two handles that come out of it, so it brings up the height a bit and allows you, instead of holding it basically in front of you like this, you're able to hold it kind of on the side. And what that's gonna do is that allows you to almost turn it into a squatting type of position. It's not a complete, you can actually really stretch it into a full squat and basically just pull the arms back completely. But if you sit your weight back and pull the arms in front of you, it'll allow you to kind of hold it out to the side, and that might correct for like a arm length issue. And it'll allow you to deadlift. If you are able to get into a position, but the only limiting factor is that your arms aren't at the right length, trap bars will help you kind of adjust for that. But at the same time, you also want to make sure that, like I said all the time, and like I keep trying to reiterate to you guys, it's all about, the back core, mobility at the hip. It's all of those factors are all going to be much more important in determining whether you should be doing that exercise or not. So the two alternatives I would say is either kettlebell goblet squat, a kettlebell deadlift, or a trap bar for that deadlift. Thank you guys for watching today's episode. I really appreciate you guys lending me your ears for the last 20-25 minutes maybe. Looks like it's gonna be a little bit longer of an episode. I would appreciate if you guys could subscribe by hitting the button below, giving me a thumbs up, leaving me a little comment to let me know what you guys think, and I will see you guys next week.